Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the podcast. I really appreciate you coming back once again. And I was given the wonderful opportunity to talk to Mark from Flat Coffee Co. once again. And I was actually rather surprised with the amount of things we ended up getting in. We talked about some mental health issues or mental health disorders, and also then just some mindset things in regards to business, how to develop a business, and then also the challenges that come along when it comes to the overall aspects of actually running a company during a pandemic as well. So I'm now going to hand over to Mark, who's going to let us know a little bit more about what he does and how he does it.
So I'm Mark Hepworth. I'm the director of the Flatcup Coffee roasting company. I share this lovely venture with my wife, Alexandra, who's not here today. We started coffee roasting a number of years ago now, and it was something that we did from our kitchen, and we did that for about 8 months. And we took a real sort of interest and passion in all things coffee. It became almost a way of life, and from there we looked at the feasibility of a business in the coffee industry, and we found that we enjoyed it. There are a number of risks. But of course, yeah, we're here now.
Fab. No, I mean, for me, the concept of coffee is something which I hold quite close to my heart, as I'm sure other business owners do. Being completely caffeinated and starting a day right and all that. So, for me, thank you so much for your time, firstly. But secondly, how did you... I'm going to use the age-old term of how did you start, right? Like, how do you go from... cool, I like creating coffee, I have a passion for coffee, and I want to do it properly, that kind of thing, to actually I can see this being a business. Actually, I want to spend every single day and minute of my professional life, so to speak, and sometimes even your personal life, I imagine, thinking and articulating why coffee roasting is important to you.
I mean, we really summarize this on our website, where we try to get that message across to people who visit, really, not just customers, but anyone who's interested in our story. But it started, like I say, a number of years ago. Myself and my wife were going through the process of discharge from the armed forces. Now I served for a number of years, 23 years to be more precise. And when you get to the end of your service, many guys can be lost. It's been your direction for a long time. Now, for the guys and girls who have unfortunately become, or succumbed to injuries, or both mental and physical, it can be just that little bit more difficult. Myself and my wife, we were going through a very difficult time. We tried to almost keep the children out of that, if you will. It's almost like they were going along their little journey, where we were going through the process. And we got ourselves sort of hooked on coffees. We would spend so many hours and days, spending so much money, going from place to place. And it was almost like a survival mode, getting out of the house, getting to a coffee shop, and enjoying a bit of normality. And it was sort of partway into that journey that we started roasting from home, just to see if we could take it up a notch. Is probably a good word. And we started to find a real passion for that. The passion wasn't always in the fact that there was coffee chaff and smoke and dust all over the kitchen, which was not good. I found myself in a lot of hot water for that. But it became a real, like I said, real passion from there on forwards. And it was after I had discharged from the military that I was fortunate enough to be sat on a course which was run by the charity Help for Heroes, and it was all about sort of what you're going to do with yourself as you move on into recovery and beyond. And I sort of come up with this idea and exchange a few messages with my wife, Alex, and the sort of idea of having a coffee roastery was born, and that was just basically from a little 200-gram roaster in the kitchen to a fully fledged 5-kilo machine, which pumps out some fantastic coffee. So yeah, that's a little bit about ourselves.
No, that's really interesting, because I think everyone's story is different, right? And that's why I like to ask it, because you know, for me, it's always interesting. You know, some people say, "Oh, I fell into this," or you know, I was just doing it as a hobby for a long time, or other people are like, "No, I've always wanted to do this, and this was always what I was driven to do." So it's always to see, you know, interesting to see where people are in the respect on that line. But I think the follow-on question there, and I've talked to some other veterans as well, and you know, I think it's really important to showcase and talk about how did you, you know, you briefly touched on it, but I think we could go a little bit more into depth. It's okay on the transition from a military lifestyle into a more civilian based lifestyle, because for me, I think I personally haven't been, but I know some veterans who have gone through it, and for me it's one of those things that will either break you or it will really give you a strong mindset and strong will to, you know, just I guess continue to move forward, or you know, to find a purpose again. Because I think the main point there is when you're in the military, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you know, it's very, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you follow this, you do this, you do this at this time, you do this at this time, and then all of that when you get discharged and when you're out of the military, all of that structure and all of that planning and all of that, you eat at this time, you wake up at this time, you exercise at this time, you do this, you do this, you do this, gets pulled away. Suddenly you're like, what? Wait, what? You know what I mean? Like, there's no one telling you need to do this, this, and this. So I mean, I guess the question there is, firstly, how difficult was it to transition? Number one, from a military lifestyle to a civilian lifestyle, but then also, what would you say was the main takeaways or the main points that was allowing you to do that?
Of course. I mean, from the moment you join the military, it is, as you just said, a very regimented system. And you know, there is a real purpose for that. You need a person who's going to be driven, motivated, and all those fantastic words, you know, in order to be able to be, you know, to overcome adversity and, you know, to achieve great things in terms of achieving objectives and, you know, workload. And you spend your whole life, you know, from a young person through adulthood into sort of, you know, early 40s if you do a full service, and you never really envisage, you know, it's not something you ever think about, is the term, shall we just say, leaving the forces. You're almost you're almost with the belief that, yes, I know I'm leaving, but actually it doesn't exist. It's almost like that's somebody else, if you will. And you know, when you get to that end stage, I saw so many guys and girls who was, you know, they were driving forward, and then, oh, I'm leaving in a few days. What am I going to do? And you know, historically, the military were very good choice of words here. I'm going to try my best, but they were not very good at preparing people for that transition to civilian life. Unfortunately, nowadays, you know, the system has improved, and there's a lot more in place. You know, there's a lot more you know, civilian integration in terms of maximizing on that potential of the quality that service provides its armed forces members. You know, like I said, my service and the discharge for me was very different. Medical discharge, it is a very difficult time. You know, if you can imagine the same drive and determination, it never goes away. And then add to that the injury, both physical and mental, or a combination of both those things, can make that sort of discharge a little bit more. You don't access the same things as well as a normal service labor would. So what would be difficult for a normal guy and girl is fundamentally sort of exaggerate in terms of that difficulty level, you know. And for me, it was almost like a cloudy time. You know, I sort of almost stumbled through the discharge process into the civilian world and didn't really know where I was. You know, I was diagnosed with quite complex PTSD, which came about from quite a number of tours. You know, I was very fortunate that I got to serve in a number of operational theatres. I got to do my job to the best of my ability, which is all very, you know, very great, very fantastic. But actually, you know, once you've got to that stage of having a physical or mental injury, which I did of both kinds, you lose that direction a little bit, and you also lose a bit of love to the military. You know, you see it as a more of a problem rather than something you can be proud of. You know, and moving through into the civilian world, you know, my my injuries and, you know, my illness was compounded by medical professionals who said, look, you are poorly enough that we believe you'll never work again. You know, you are finished as a person. And for me, that, I mean, there were many times that just didn't sit right with something a little bit deeper than that sort of, you know, that conscious level. And, you know, I was always thinking about what we can do, you know, because I didn't agree with never doing nothing. And, you know, the world of coffee just seemed to, it just seemed to be something, not that we stepped into, something we worked quite hard to be a part of, if you will. And, you know, we're sat here now, and it gives me that drive every day, that focus, because you know, I've got this business, this you know, and my family's got this direction. It doesn't mean that the mental injuries have ever gone away. They're still very much there, but you learn through a little bit of compassion towards yourself to, I guess, be kind. You know, and every day you go, what do I have to do today? And unfortunately for me and my family, we've got this focus.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and really thank you for sharing that, because I think it's sometimes quite difficult, especially people who do, who have suffered, especially mental, you know, disabilities and disorders as well, whether that's through someone like yourself or whether they were actually born with it, or, you know, etc. In that respect, to be seen as this, like, you know, especially when someone tells you you're not going to work again, right? That's quite a drastic thing. And I think, you know, I mean, the question I would have for you is, do you think that's part of the kind of momentum or the you know, strength that you have to say, actually, no, I'm going to make sure I can do this. I'm going to make sure I can build this business. I'm going to make sure I can actually work, because, you know, because for me, for a long time, a lot of people have said to me, oh, you know, you'll never amount to X. You'll never be able to do X, Y, and Z, because I'm dyslexic, right? So, you know, if anything requires English or anything like that at all, no. Let's just give up while you're ahead, because you're not going to be able to do it, because etc. But for me, I was always like, right, okay, well, yes, I maybe this is a bigger challenge than most people for me, but it's not something I can't overcome, right? So I think, you know, would you say that is a factor in the respect to you've actually been able to, you know, be successful in the company that you now run and you now have and is your job, because of the fact you were told, oh, you will never be able to work again?
I mean, I've always been, ever since very young, I think you can probably use the word a little bit sort of almost defiant to that word of, you're not doing this or you can't do this. And, you know, I think, you know, even if we take the word and say defiance, I think it's actually a real strength in many cases, because when somebody's told me, you're never going to do this, it's almost like, oh, I don't like that. You know, that doesn't fit well with me. And, you know, I tried to move mountains to try and fight that, to my detriment and to the detriment of my family sometimes, you know, trying to do things that were probably well in excess of my ability at the time of being discharged and being poorly. And, you know, I would never say to somebody, you know, what somebody's told them in a medical professional, that what they've said is wrong. But I will always sort of, for myself especially, challenge that and try to do what you can within your own boundaries. You know, you touched on dyslexia there, which I don't understand from my own perspective, but looking at my writing sometimes and my ability to misinterpret, you know, written language, I would say I'm not diagnosed, but, you know, I'm not brilliant at English either. I've got a child who has dyslexia, and I've got other children. Out of my three have got autism and special needs. So there was always an air of, for me, that to lie down and to accept the ruling of a medical professional saying you will never do would be, you know, and I think this is personal to me, and I would never like to sort of push this view on other people, because everyone's different. But for me, it was, if I was to lie down, then I would be passing that message on to my children, that as soon as you come up against adversity, that, you know, you're never going to, you know, amount to anything. You know, and that's a difficult thing to sort of teach your children, especially when they're starting out in life. So I always say, you know, with the right support, compassion where it's needed, support and care, and anything is possible with some desire and some real drive and determination.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think it's one of those things where, yes, it might be really challenging for me to be good at English, for example, but it is possible, right? It's not impossible. Is it going to be harder than the average person? Yes. But does that mean I have advantages in other places? Because for those who don't understand dyslexia, and I won't go too far into it because I'm not an expert by any means, but my brain's wired differently than someone who doesn't have dyslexia. It's not I'm different in the respect to I literally think differently. I literally take the same information. We could be both given the same amount of information, the same thing, and I will come up with something very different and think about it very differently. And that is a beneficial aspect sometimes, but also very, very drastically from the opposite, depending on the situation, right? But there is a lot of benefits, and I think for me, for people who maybe who have dyslexia listening to this, I think it's important for you to understand whatever stage you have, because dyslexia has a spectrum, right? Along with a lot of learning disabilities, there's I would say I'm quite severe. From what I've been told, I'm quite severe dyslexic. But for me, the thing I quote unquote overcame it was understanding, okay, well, what are the limitations of this of my brain capacity here? What is the issues here? How do I overcome those? Right? Okay, and what tactics and what things can I do to overcome those, so then I can just benefit from having it, because there is creative differences, and there's reasons why I'm able to do other things because I've had dyslexia, because of where my brain's wired, right? So I think it's important to appreciate that. And I think in any case, like, people talk about it quite a lot in respect to, maybe you've got, I know it's not the same, but like maybe you've got depression, for example, right? So if you've got depression and you know how dark and etc. it can go, you're then going to be more thankful and more grateful for when it's not like that, because you know the other end of the spectrum. In the same way, I imagine, and I'll throw back to you in a minute, but I imagine when you aren't dealing with your PTSD or having issues with your PTSD, you're a lot more fulfilled and a lot more grateful for the ability to be able to not have to deal with those problems, because you understand the other end of the spectrum. You understand how difficult that can be. But also, I think for you, is there part of you that kind of wants to, I guess, educate people on it, number one, but number two, also, be there for possibly other veterans, or possibly other, because there's quite a lot of talk, and I don't know, from what I found anyway, where a lot of veterans talk about PTSD, but PTSD can also be caused by many other different factors that have actually nothing to do with the military, right? So I think, have you found that you in some ways want to educate people on PTSD as a concept, or learning disabilities as a concept?
Absolutely, and you mentioned the word limitations there, and I always like to use comfortable. I like to put the word comfortable in there as well, because I think it almost gives you, it takes that sort of harshness away from a boundary, a comfortable boundary, and something that you can live within. And live to accept. It almost becomes a way of life, and it's definitely something that we try to do a lot of. We try to work. Especially myself and my wife. My wife does a lot of volunteering with Art for Heroes. This is why I use the word. I involve myself in a slightly less pressurized environment in terms of working with the charity, but I think it is important to try and sort of, I don't like to use the word educate, because it almost seems like you're trying to tell people what they should and shouldn't be feeling, but trying to give people an element of hope, and to say, look, this was my journey. My journey is different to your journey, and be it whatever the cause or the causes were to get you to where you are now, we have an understanding, and that's all there is, an understanding of what we may not be going through alongside each other. And to say, look, I always say to people, the best thing you can do initially is to be kind to yourself, to just almost take a step aside and say, okay, this is what I am. I have my good days. I have my, I use the word good days. I have my not so good days, and there's generally somewhere in the middle, and just to, just to be kind to that person, because You know, you can have your bad days, and you can really, really, you know, be harsh on yourself. And when you're doing that to yourself, and when you are being harsh, you find that your better days are few and far between. But just to take a step to one side and say, you know, I feel for you, and you know, I appreciate what you've gone through, and you know, that acceptance, that kindness, can often be the difference between a difficult day and a less difficult day. You know, and you know, it's the same with anything you mentioned. You know, mental illness, and I have my understanding of what I went through. But you know, PTSD, like you said, can be military, it can be, you know, civilian, it can, and there can be so many different causes to that. But it's all very relative to the body's reaction to something. You know, and what one person would say, well, you must be more severe, and you must be less so because your situation was different. But what I would always say is, well, you know, I was a military person, therefore I was trained to be something and have an expectation of what could happen and a reaction to what I witnessed, or the things I witnessed and the things that I had to do. Well, you know, my reaction to that was to eventually be diagnosed with a mental illness. You know, and the same goes for the other person. You know, just because they've not been in a military combat, or you know, they could have been in a car accident, or you know, it could be anything. It's just a body's reaction to a really bad thing, and that's okay. You know, there's no more severe, less severe, and you know, I don't like to, you know, in my capacity, tar people with severe severity of whatever, because I think that's, again, you put a limitation in there then, and that's not good.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, and I think it's one of those things where, you know, to every single person, wherever they are on the quote unquote spectrum, to them, they're at the top, completely and utterly at the top. It might not be at the top, but that's very subjective, right? Because if you hit the top for you, that's you know, and you know, it's the concept of you are at the top for you, right? It doesn't actually matter whether you could be worse, because for you that is as worse as you've ever been. And something like PTSD or etc. is, from my understanding of it anyway, it's a way of your brain helping you be able to deal with and survive, because the job of your brain is to help you survive, right? That's the point, right? It goes back to when we were living in caves and we had to worry about a saber-tooth tiger walking in, right? Like, that's where it comes back to, and it's your way of your brain going, right, this is going to cause us an issue, this is how I'm going to deal with you not having to think about or deal with that issue. But there's certain aspects of that it can't stop from happening. So it's the, you know, it's the best middle ground it can find, right? So, you know, I don't want to get too much into this, because I know it's a topic which is very, very complicated in respect to how and etc. And by no means am I an expert. I'm sure you're not either. So I think it's not fair to necessarily go into any more depth. But I really, really appreciate you talking about that. And I think the next couple of things I'd like to talk about in general is, you know, you've obviously gone through business challenges, and you've obviously gone through things which obviously haven't gone well necessarily. And I say that, and I mean that in the nicest way, because every business, no matter how qualified you are or no matter how good you are at business, the reality of the fact is it's going to go wrong at some point, right? Whether it's a week in, 6 months in, or a year in, still going to go wrong. So the question there, I think, and the question I ask is, what are the problems you've run into? So it could have been the pandemic, it could have been anything, but how have you been able to change, pivot, adapt, fix, change those problems that have occurred? And, you know, could you give an example of a problem which you were able to tackle as a business owner? Because I think the main thing for me, and something that I found when I listen to content and I consume content, is really valuable, is when people share how they're not always like, yeah, my business is amazing, yeah, my business is this and this and this, and yeah, of course we want to talk about that, but the businesses, in my opinion, that I connect with the most, and you know, this would be advice to anyone looking to create content as well, is showing when it goes wrong and showing how you fix it, because it's going to go wrong. Okay, the reality of the fact is it's a matter of when, not a matter of if. So you know, okay, well, let me ask you, has it gone wrong? And if so, how have you fixed it?
Wow, yeah. I think the business went wrong for a lot of people, and you know, one of the things that myself and my wife, we when we started our business, we had a very firm business idea. We were going to supply, you know, independent coffee shops, and our main business focus was to supply coffee shops, hotels, pubs, all those kind of customers. And we set ourselves up to do just that. Our online presence was very minimal. If a customer wanted to buy coffee, a person like yourself, it would have been a little bit more of a difficult. There were a lot of barriers for you to buy the coffee. And when the pandemic hit, we were just getting into our stride. We've been trading for 7 months, 8 months, and the customers were starting to increase quite nicely. And we moved into the pandemic, and we were not prepared at all. From a business perspective, we had an idea of business, B2C kind of trading, and I was fortunate enough to have a friend now who's worked in big business in London, somebody I met through Help for Heroes. And if I could say we were very fortunate that I had that sort of expertise to fall back on, we could quickly, almost on our feet really, change direction, and there was a little bit of interruption because one of my children was poorly with coronavirus right back at the start of the first lockdown. And that little bit of time allowed us to, almost go from sort of 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock in terms of who our customers were. And, fortunately, we've managed to move into more of a business to customer, home consumer kind of way of working, while still maintaining our previous role. So what we've really done in effect is to totally diversify and almost supply everybody, which goes against your initial business plan. And who's your main customer? And we're like, well, yeah, this, and now we've got everybody almost in terms of who we can work with. And it was really, we were fortunate in terms of when you start business, you've got an expectation of not making a massive amount of money in the first few years. So again, for us, the pandemic hit, and whilst it was moral, from a morale sort of perspective, it hit hard. From an income perspective, it wasn't so much of a problem.
Yeah, I think it's really important sometimes to be in the position where and you sort of, I mean, the pandemic for me really showed me that I was like, well, okay, these are the weaknesses in my business, right? Like, I was like, right, so I need to go out and film with people to make money, right? Okay. So basically, when I can't do that, I don't make money at the moment. It's like, oh, okay, so that's the problem, right? Fine. How do we fix this problem? And I think a lot of what you talked about there is, a lot of the time in marketing we talk about, oh, we've got this ideal customer, right? Now, but the key word in that is ideal, okay? That doesn't mean I'm only going to target them. I'm only going to sell to them, right? They are the ideal person because they're going to take less work to sell to. Is the simple answer there, pretty much. Is they're going to be less work to actually get money from, right? But the thing is, it doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily try to sell to other people, right? And I think that especially people who are passionate about coffee, specifically, a lot of them are starting to, well, they have either invested or they will be investing in the equipment and the ability to be able to brew at home, right? And I think that's a more common thing now, which is great for you guys, and it was great to hear that you guys have kind of pivoted towards serving that market, because that market, correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, probably didn't really exist as much. It was there, but it was very niche, right? But it's becoming quite a lot more common. I mean, there's an ironic, in the filmmaking world where a lot of filmmakers do like coffee montages, right? Like it becomes a meme at some point, because there's a lot of people who, especially creatives, who like normally pair creative thinking and coffee, right? And I think there's a definite crossover in passion there, but I think sometimes you can get sort of, it becomes a joke, but also not, if that makes sense, because you're kind of almost, in some ways, as a filmmaker, expected if you drink coffee to make a coffee montage, which is not necessarily the truth, because sometimes you may not necessarily want to do that, or etc. But I think moving back to the whole ideal customer scenario, I mean, for me, I expanded my services completely. I offered mentoring and podcast production because I knew how to do it. through video production, you kind of know how to do that. And then the mentoring side is more, I have experience in business that I think is going to be valuable for other business owners. Normally they're people who are less fortunate than myself in regards to they're in an earlier stage, but that doesn't mean I can't help someone who is at the same stage as me or even further ahead, because sometimes you just need someone who thinks differently or thinks creatively differently or helps you creatively fix a problem. And I think the main goals there, or the main concepts there, is that you as a business, and one of the main things, and I don't know whether you found this, but you should always be looking to rip up your business plan and be like, right, the situation right now means we need to do it this way. Because it's not just the pandemic. We can use the example of the pandemic because everyone's going to relate to the pandemic because it's happening right now, and it's happened right now. It's happened in the last year, but it could be a recession. It could be suddenly the supplier you've been using for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, suddenly for whatever reason goes out of business and doesn't exist anymore. So now you've suddenly got a huge problem where you were sourcing whatever it was, and now you don't have a sourcer for that. So you're like, this is okay, right, okay. And we could theorize about every other problem that may arise, but the reality of the fact is, I think that you more develop a problem-solving mindset, for me anyway, because as I've gone through business, I tell clients up front, it's like, look, every video production always has at least 2 problems, at least 2, right? I have been doing it for 3.5, nearly 4 years, just over 4 years. Every single production I've had in that time has had at least 2 problems within the project. A model doesn't show up. It rains when it's not meant to. The camera gear that I meant to use breaks, or there's an issue, or so on, or whatever, right? And I think it's about one of those things where you need to know how to fix a problem and stay calm in a stressful situation, or what would be seen as a stressful situation, to allow you to be able to, I think, grow as well. Because I'll throw back to you to hear your thoughts on it, because I'm always interested to hear what other business owners feel when they're in a stressful situation. Because for me, I feel it always as this is a challenge, it's going to test me, and if I can get through it out the other side, I'm actually going to feel like I'm a better business owner. I'm going to feel like I'm a stronger business owner because of that. And I think, it's the same whenever you take on a project that's, in my case anyway, like, oh my God, this is ridiculous, the amount of money or the project size or whatever it is, And I think for me, it's one of those things where you push yourself outside your comfort zone, but if you do it consistently, you kind of just get used to it. I mean, have you found that there is situations where yourself, in your own trade, have you sort of pushed yourself outside your comfort zone? Have you needed to? And then if so, that's all right. And then if so, has it grown you as a business owner?
Absolutely, and I excuse the interruption there. I think as a business owner, it's no. I mean, I don't find it fun. I use the word fun there when you're plain sailing and everything's going straight forward, and you think, oh, where's the challenge? And of course you like it when it's going simple and it's going in that direction. But I think to move into business yourself, I think that takes a little bit of risk as well. And I think you must get something from, I guess, that risk. There must be something that goes, ticks the light box and it appeals. So when you're going along and you come up with a challenge and you find yourself sat up at night time not sleeping, and you're working through a problem both when you're awake and when you're asleep, and you're scratching your head and you're working these problems out. That's fantastic. And we've done that many a times. Before we started the business, in terms of can we do these kind of things, and the sleepless nights out there, and you're moving into an industry which some guys have been doing this their whole lives, and only 5 years ago I was doing something completely different. That in itself is a phenomenal challenge. So I think you definitely grow. You definitely grow as a person, as a business, as a brand, by accepting these challenges, taking them head on, and being able to to move left and right of them. That's what I like to do. Work a problem and come to a solution. Because if you let that problem consume, then your business suffers. You suffer. Your immediate family suffers, and that's not good for anybody. So absolutely, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where most people don't necessarily appreciate or don't necessarily understand that it's business owners who will adapt and change. It's not actually the business, right? Now, this is not the first time I heard this wasn't actually me, but I've kind of like really relate to that, because a good friend and someone who I've worked with for a very long time said, you know, that specifically when we were talking about how he's pivoted his company in the pandemic and how I've managed to and others have managed to as well. And I think that one of those things, it becomes a challenge which you know is going to happen, right? Like after you've gone through a certain amount of challenges, you're just like, okay, well, okay, cool, there's a problem now, great, I need to do these steps to get through it. And I think it's one of those things where once those people around you understand, right, okay, right now for Mark or for me or etc., it's a very stressful time, or it's a very thing. But there's also stages in business as a business owner where things are going well, things are all good, things are, you know, but you don't continue, and you don't, because, you know, we talk about a lot in my content anyway, and I'm sure you've heard it as well. Basically the odds are against you the second you decide to go out on your own, right? But I think the main thing that is going to allow you to be the 2%, the 1%, whatever it may be, is in that position where you know there's going to be a problem, and in the times where there's not a problem, you're able to prepare yourself mentally, physically, and financially to be able to then handle the problem. You know, I'll give you a real life example. Quite recently, my laptop decided it just wanted to break. Right, this is quite problematic when you edit and you need a computer. Clearly, as we're on the podcast right now, I clearly have a computer. And I'm very lucky in the fortunate position where I have owned and do own 2 computers, right? A laptop and then a tower. But the problem was the tower's specs were lower than I would need necessarily to do my job. So I had to make a financial risk to be able to continue to work at the optimal level that I was working at, right? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it's one of those things where, are you willing to take that risk? And then, you know, what is the opportunity cost of you not taking that risk? You know, I could have played it safe and gone, actually, no, this computer does exactly what I need it to do in most cases. Does it take me 3 times, 4 times as long? Yes. But does it do the job I need it to do? Yes, it does. But the problem is that you need to understand, and you need to ask yourself is, how much does that time, that 3 times amount, 4 times amount, whatever it is, actually going to cost you? How much is that going to cost you? And is it more or less than what I have to do to get this computer to the spec which I need it to be, for example? And you can use the same example in anything you do, because it's one of those things. Are you willing to take a risk day after day after day after day after day in business to keep your business growing, keep your business moving forward? And arguably, I would say anyone who's a business owner still, and even if your business isn't doing very well right now, that's fine. But you need to ask yourself, what are you doing every day to ensure that tomorrow for your business is going to be better than today? You know, I think that's the main thing. And I think, you know, what would you say to people who are like, oh, I don't know, I don't know, it's risky, this is a risk, or people have said to me, oh, going out on your own is risky, or etc. You know, what would you say to those people?
So I remember a conversation, and you know, there's conservative estimates of your business. You know, what would be, you know, initially starting up. You know, what are your costs? And always go with the worst case scenario. And you know, I use the word worst case scenario, and it's almost like it's probably the best to look at it at business that way. I mean, because whilst when you're starting your business, or whilst you're moving through, what I've learned in my short time in business is it's all about scalability. You know, and you know, you mentioned your computer there. You know, whilst yes, a computer which would be able to do a job, okay, it's not very scalable. It limits you, and that's a big decision we had to make in terms of the sort of the equipment we purchased. You know, and you know, it's all about what's going to happen tomorrow or 6 months' time, and that's the beauty of a business plan for us, is, you know, forecasting where you are now and where you could be in a year's time if things go in the right direction. You know, having a pandemic aside, you know, that was definitely not something we put in the business plan, but you know, we've reacted to that. So yeah, have an idea, and always go with the less conservative side of it, and take it to the right in terms of where you think you're going to be, the sort of challenges you may or may not face, and you know, what you want back from the business. Yeah, and that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think the main thing there is, like, if you're in a position where you can see the worst case scenario, right? And you can be in a position where you're like, right, this is absolutely the worst case. I went full time a month before the pandemic hit, right? And it was like, the worst case scenario here is really bad recession, the economy dips, right? Little did I know, right, that the worst case scenario was actually a pandemic. But it's not something you could guess. And I remember it very, very clearly. I was watching a video literally just a week or so after I had gone full time, and I was watching an American in China, okay? And he was talking about, oh, this is bad. People are. It was like I think it was Chinese like Spring New Year or something along those lines. It was a Chinese holiday, and everyone was like going outside of the big population centers in China. And I remember can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, this could get really bad, or this could go global. And my heart just went, you know, that sinking feeling you get in your stomach. I had it instantly. I was like, this is going to be really bad for a really long time, isn't it? And I was like, oh God. Now, at that point, I didn't realize what was going to happen. I just knew, yeah, that plan that I had, you're going to need to scrap it and going to need to like go back to that tomorrow morning or the next day or the next week, because something is going to change, and it's going to be drastic, because it suddenly went from the problem is over on the other side of the world problem to the problem is about to arrive on my doorstep. Oh, right, okay. So then it was a question of, how do I deal with that problem, right? And I think that what people can take from this is that, yes, the pandemic is the most recent of a larger catastrophe, a larger problem, but business owners or businesses still need to operate, still need to exist, still need to move forward. Yes, you may change in the ways you do it and the procedures you have, but for the good of the world's economy in general, I'm not even talking the UK now, business owners have to still trade, right? We still have to make money, because it's the only way you're going to have an economic bounce back or an economic way of getting better than we currently are, or will be currently are, is by money changing hands. That's how it works, right? That's how economies work. That's how they grow, right? When people spend, that's the point of spending. And the main thing is understanding the more you put out, I think, in some ways, and the more you give, the better you, in most cases, the more you get back, from what I found anyway. So I think it's about, yes, right now, maybe it's a scary time to invest, but you still should invest. You still should be investing, because it will, if it's done correctly, and if it's done smart with your brain, and not just your gut, but also your brain, it will then benefit you in the long term. And it's always the question of, do you want to benefit now, or do you want to benefit in 3 months, 6 months, or a year, or 2 years, or 5 years? And for me, I've always made decisions on, right now, this is not going to benefit me. Right now, this is going to hurt me. But it's always going to benefit me in 3 months. It's going to benefit me in 6 months. It's going to benefit me in a year. And then I'm in a position where I become, the things I did 6 months ago are now benefiting me now. And the things I do now are going to benefit me in 6 months. So it's that kind of, once you start doing that, you gain momentum, because you are then in a position where you've already done the hard work 6 months ago. But you need to do the point where you start doing that and go through the 3, 4 months or 5 months or 6 months or whatever it is that are challenging before you can start reaping the rewards. Does that make sense? Like that's just how I think about it. I mean, have you done the same thing? Have you seen the same thing in respect to your business?
Listening to what you were saying there, I picked up on a few things, and I think for everybody really, but for business owners as well, accepting what's happened. Excuse me, Alexa's getting involved as well. She's got a lot to say sometimes, but to accept, the pandemic, the issue at the time. You say it can take tomorrow, or the day after, but eventually you'll come to terms with, wow, what is happening? And once you come to terms with what's happened, be it pandemic, be, like you say, recession, or or whatever, I think that's the point where you can change direction a little bit, and then to adapt, to the new now, whatever it is today, whatever it's going to be for the foreseeable few days, if you will, and adapting by changing the way you are as a person, the way you work your business, the types of customers you want to attract, And from there, I feel once you've achieved those two things to the best of your ability, then you can start to prosper again. And it's like you say, you know, we live in an amazing global world where people have become accustomed to certain things, and the only way we can continue to be, you know, to access those things is if we do those three things, you know, accept, adapt, and prosper. And I think that's definitely the way forward. And you know, I think that's definitely the way that we've been trying to work ourselves in our business.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think it's really important, if you don't necessarily appreciate that or understand that, to be in a position where you do understand that and you are able to learn that, right? It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but you are then in a position where you can grow, you can develop, and you can see where you need to get better at as a person, as a business owner, in any trade. And I think, you know, it's really important to do that. But I think, you know, that's kind of everything I wanted to cover today. I mean, I really appreciate the time. Is there, I like to add in on the end of the podcast, because I've had interviews before where I'm dying to ask the interviewer a question. So let me throw back to you. I mean, do you have a question for me, or do you have a topic specifically that you want to throw in that we can talk about for a couple of minutes?
Wow. I mean, wow, goodness me, you've put me right on the spot there. It's one of those interview questions where you go for your job, especially when I joined the military, and they said, "Have you got any questions for me?" And I'm like, no, I don't. You know, something I could spend all day talking about a myriad of things, and probably find myself not an expert in many of them. But I mean, as a job yourself, I've followed a few of the things you did. I watched the podcast that you did with a coffee venue in Salisbury a few days ago. I was very interested in that. You know, because of course they are, for me, they are what I would class as a very
potential client.
And I mean, I sort of, you know, I'm intrigued to talk to people like yourself, because, you know, I like the way that you interact with people, and you know, we've spoken for nearly an hour now, and we've spoken about some, you know, very quick fire questions. But I mean, in terms of the people you speak to, is there sort of a, you know, do you choose at random, or is there a generic kind of, I mean, coffee is a big thing, but, you know, it's not everything. But I mean, is there a sort of, who do you like to talk to, you know? And I mean, I don't know if that has to be in the end thing.
No, of course. I mean, for me, I think the main thing there is to, like, who do I talk to, right? The simple answer on the podcast in general is anyone who I can see a level of passion involved in what they do. You know, you came from an initial call out on Facebook about, look, I've got this podcast, I need some more guests. Anyone suggest that? I got people who I know to suggest people to come on, and you were part of that process, luckily. And what I did was I just reached out to the majority. And for me, even in doing that process, you kind of vet who you're gonna get on, because if they don't make the action to actually message you back and say, yeah, let's do it, then they're not the right person, because they're not the kind of person who would be willing to take that seize that opportunity. Right now, whether people see this as an opportunity is so subjective. It's, you know, we could be here forever. But for me, I would hope anyway, I'm quite good at talking to people. And, you know, for the viewers' context, me and Mark have never discussed, like, really at all outside of like 2 minutes before the podcast, basically. And I think for me, the reason why I know I'm quite good at talking to people is because in most cases, when I've talked to someone for half an hour to 20 minutes, whatever it is, we end up finding quite a lot of common ground deliberately. And that's just because, for me, the way I've kind of ended up building Branded Media to be what it is now is because it is very focused on these specific values and these specific goals and these specific, you know, business passion and that kind of thing. So the natural people are going to sort of grow towards that. And that's why I say they're kind of the right people, but that's not saying deliberately like saying, oh no, you're the wrong person. It's just, if you are going to, you know, I initially reached out to everyone. I went, look, I would love to see who was to come on, but then there's a lot of different factors that go involved between that initial conversation and actually us here on Zoom having the conversation. You know, like, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So firstly, did you get the message? Secondly, did we organise a time that works for both of us? Thirdly, is that time still from when we set it up to, in our case, now, it wasn't. We nearly had to reschedule twice. I think it was something like that because of me or because of you, etc. But also then it's like, okay, if you have to reschedule, do you then also then make sure it can happen still? And I think the people who are willing to take that opportunity are going to be the ones who take opportunity in general, right? Like if I'm given an opportunity to talk or be interviewed or etc., I always take it because I enjoy talking about what I do, and I enjoy talking to people who are passionate about what they do. And this is not necessarily me get on my soapbox and I'm going to talk about what I do all the time. And that's why I said to you at the start, it's like, for me, the podcast isn't about advertising. Yes, you get a bit of passive advertising through it, because otherwise no business owner would do it, right? But the point is not, right, Mark, so what do you sell? How do you sell it? Where can we find? We'll do that bit in a minute. But the whole point is that we're building a level of trust first. You know, if the person has sat through 51, 52 minutes, 55 minutes of us talking, they're actually quite likelihood that they're probably going to want to actually know more about you. Because if they get this far through, they are interested enough in you and me to hear us talk for 50 minutes. Right? I think the majority of people, to be honest, probably would have left by now. That's nothing against you or me. That's just people's attention, the people's attention spans. There's a lot going on social media specifically, and there's a lot of other more interesting sometimes or perceived to be interesting examples of content they could consume. So I think it's important, and that's why I don't know whether that answers your question, but I hope it did.
Absolutely. I mean, I just want to jump in there. I'm listening to what you said there, and you know, it's always amazes me. You know, like I say, moving into business, that I naively, I guess, assumed that everybody else who is in business has the same sort of drive. You know, moving towards the right hand side of a pandemic, I hope, and you know, starting to interact with companies again. That naivety has come forward. It's almost like, you know, I made business inquiries with people who I would like to use as various means to enable me, if you will. And you know, I'm still, even now, 3 years in, 2 years in, I'm gobsmacked that when you make an inquiry, you make a second and a third inquiry, that then they don't get back to you. And you sort of sometimes question, is it me? Is it something I've done wrong? Or is it just the fact that, dude, what are you doing? You know, your business needs to be more reactive, because I'm a customer and I'm coming at you guys, you know what I mean? And you're just not doing the thing. So yeah, it's amazing you say what you say, and yeah, you did answer my question.
Fab. Absolutely. And I think it's really important to understand that when someone, for whatever reason, isn't interested, right? And it's nothing against that person, it's nothing against you. It's simply their life's very busy, they maybe miss the message, maybe they don't check their messages as often, and that's a problem with their own business. And the reality of the fact is, they're gonna lose business for that, but that's not your problem, no offense, right? Like, anyone listening to this, check your inboxes, okay? Get back to your inboxes, because the amount of money, perceived money, that could be there is ridiculous, especially nowadays. The amount of business I do through Instagram DMs is ridiculous, right? Now, I don't just mean I get business, I also pay people and organise things where I'm buying a product or service through Instagram DMs. Right, it's not always about or Facebook Messenger, etc. You know, it's less formal now in how we're selling. You know, people will message me out the blue going, "We've got this idea for a video. Could we have a conversation about it?" I'm like, "Yes, let's do it." It may not even become me doing the video. That's not the important bit. The important bit is I'm taking every opportunity I can get to talk about it, and sometimes that leads on to work, sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's the important bit. And I think that if you're going to take one thing from this podcast or this conversation, that's the actionable steps you should take. You know, act on those things. And if you feel, oh, you know, got that thought in your head going, oh, I should follow up with that person, then don't wait for them to follow up with you. Send them a message, reach out to them, give them a call, see what the issue is, what their barrier is if they are a customer. You know, what is their issue? Maybe they don't know how much it costs. Maybe they don't know what the next step is. Maybe they were waiting on you. Maybe they completely forgot, etc. You know, people's lives are busy. So it's not always personal that they forget you. It's they've got other priorities, family, so on. That means they sometimes will forget what they said they would do. So you need to sometimes poke them and remind them and say, hey, look, are you still interested? What's the issue here? How can I help? What's the can I ring someone? Can we have a conversation with someone else, etc. And the larger companies you work with, that happens even more, from what I found. And I think, and it's about understanding and about appreciating that, but then also being in a position where you can be the solution for your client or your customer. I mean, where for those people who may be interested in seeing more what you do, that kind of thing, where's best for people to reach out to you?
I mean, we've got a bigger presence now, and we've got a website, which is flatcupcoffee.com. And it goes into a little bit more detail about our journey, in both our journey through the military into coffee, and the kind of things we sell, the regions we sell, and what we specialize in. We've also got a very nice online presence. We're hitting Facebook and Instagram, and working with the everyday you must post more kind of sort of mindset. But it works, and it helps to spread that message. So yeah, that's who we are.
Fab. Well, thank you ever so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And
you're very welcome.
And, yeah, job done.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me, ladies and gents. I hope you did enjoy it as much as I did, actually running the interview and etc. And I think personally for me, I think it's important to sometimes discuss some of the challenges we have in business and in life in general, so we can help others overcome their challenges as well. So thank you so much for joining me once again. If you did enjoy this video, I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. And if you're brand new to the channel, why not subscribe? It's free, and you can always change your mind a little bit later. But yeah. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back next week for a brand new episode of the podcast, and I'll see you very, very soon.